Stick on that speak with here and about these truths.
All right, so good afternoon. My name is Lauren Spaziano. With me today, I've got Rob Reinheimer, John Mike, and then all the way from Norfolk, Travis Salian. Does anyone recognize the title of our presentation?
Step
Step Brothers, that's right. So you might be like, what does this have to do with co-orientation? So the movie, for those of you who don't know, is about two guys. They become stepbrothers. Initially, they really just don't get along. They don't like each other at all. They find out that they both really, really dislike one of their brothers, like birth brothers. So they start figuring out what else they have in common. So co-orientation theory, it's not a perfect model, but it kind of tells us what it's about. You see two or more parties, you see how they view one another, and then you see an object in which they have a common interest, and then you see how alike they are. So for our study, we wanted to take a look at how we as public relations practitioners are co-oriented or aligned with other internal communicators within our organization. I forgot to add the clicker.
Face it. Christian.
So when we were doing our research, we found a lot of stuff on internal communication and on co-orientation, but not a lot that talked about both of them at the same time. So we wanted to look at this through a military lens, of course, because we're all Navy public affairs officers. So for the public relations practitioners, we looked at Navy PAOs, public affairs officers, and for our partial support resources, we took a look at Navy ombudsman. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, some of the civilians out in the audience, idea. What an ombudsman is, they're a service member spouse. They're all volunteers. So they, on the civilian side, you can kind of equate them to an employee assistance program, where they're that confidential resource for employees and their families, so they can get support when they need it. So internal communication, right? It's one of the most important things that we do. It's important to our bosses. It's important to us. And the ombudsmen are a crucial link. I don't know about you guys, but I didn't really know my ombudsman on my last command, but on my previous command, I worked with them almost every day. So depending on the command and depending on how you work as a public affairs officer, you might work with them, you might not. But you need to know who they are. You don't have to be best friends with them, but you need to know who they are so you guys can be aligned in your communication to these internal audiences.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Travis Callahan. So for our study, we utilized an anonymous online survey aimed at two populations, Navy public relations professionals and Navy ombudsmen. It shows the Navy because it's a large organization with uniform job roles and descriptions that account for a wide range of roles within internal communications civilian organizations. The Navy Public Affairs Committee represents the civilian organizations' public relations representatives, while ombudsmen are a mirror of a civilian organization's partial support system. So our study was distributed online via email and social media between November 2023 through March of 2024, being directed at Navy public relations professionals, and then a snowball sample of ombudsmen that started through personal contacts. Unfortunately, we did hit a couple challenges during our study. Our survey allowed respondents to skip questions or to quit the survey before completing it, meaning we had incomplete surveys that we had to remove. There's also a 6 to 12 month time frame needed to get Navy Institutional Review Board approval of our study, which would allow us to use official Navy channels to distribute the survey. We were unable to get. Because of this, we were limited to unofficial means only that were approved through the San Diego State, IRB, and this really impacted our ability to reach ombudsmen, especially because we couldn't go directly to them through official Navy channels. All told, we had 81 respondents, with 58 being public relations professionals and 23 being current or former ombudsmen.
All right, so a little bit about our survey. We used 4 different scales. The first one we used was a source credibility scale. It took a look at how the ombudsman and the PAOs saw one another with relation to their goodwill. So if they thought, their counterpart had their best interests in heart, their trustworthiness, and their competence. So do they think they'd be able to do their job? We also looked at a leadership-seeking scale and an opinion-seeking scale. And then we also looked at role enactment, which
I shared your picture. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Lennick, and our results are based on how our two groups ranked each other based on our 6 dependent variables when communicating with family members. Those were competency, goodwill, leadership seeking, opinion seeking, trustworthiness, and role enactment. So to kind of break down a couple of the variables that aren't quite as straightforward as the others, I'm going to talk about what is leadership seeking. Well, that's whether or not a person thinks that they're capable of managing communication or, providing feedback and giving feedback on that communication. Role enactment is more like the technical side of the job. Are they able to manage a Facebook account or write news releases or take photos? So what did our study find? Well, we found using independent sample t-tests that we had correlation between 4 of our independent variables. Those were competency, goodwill, trustworthiness, and role and act in leadership seeking. So basically that meant the two groups basically see each other in the same way when being looked at those factors. Now, when we found dissensus is it opinion seeking and role enactment. So using a factor analysis, we took role enactment and broke it down into 3 different categories. Those were manager, technician, and social media. So we did find statistically significant data on the technician role. So on the whole, we found that when it comes to communicating with families, public relations practitioners and ombudsmen really don't seek out what each other think before communicating. However, we also found that ombudsmen feel that public relations practitioners do a little bit better job of the technical side of the work they're communicating as opposed to vice versa. On the whole, all our statistics were statistically insignificant with the exception of role enactment.
Hi, thanks, John. My name's Rob Reinheimer. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. So obviously we've been talking about the Navy Ombudsman Program quite a bit. Does anyone know, a little audience participation, when the Navy Ombudsman Program first started? Just shout out some years.
1995.
1995, earlier than that. Great guess, lower.
73.
73, a little bit lower, sir.
75.
A little bit higher than 24. I think I heard someone say 1970. Dr. Sweetser has a crisp $100 bill for whoever said that.
Like that.
Gentleman in the back. But anyway, yeah, it's started by Admiral Elmo Zumwalt. He's a 3-star admiral in 1970, chosen to be the next CNO over a bunch of 4 stars because they knew they had the right man at the right time. For some context, it was the end of the Vietnam War. Retention in the Navy was very low, and they needed someone who was smart and keen at communicating to build that retention rate back up. He also affected our community as he promoted Captain Bill Thompson to Admiral Bill Thompson, being first Navy PAO to make the rank band. But anyway, internal communication, Admiral Zumwalt was keen on internal communication and two-way communication, and that's something that we value to this day within the Navy. Just a few years ago, Chief of Naval Personnel did a survey, study on internal communication, how we can better reach our sailors. And some of the feedback that they got, some of the data, is something you'd expect out of, a civilian organization and employee relations. Employees are sailors. They want to be spoken to face-to-face by someone that they trust, right? A lot of them, they don't have access to email throughout the day. They're out working on the flight deck. They need to be spoken to face-to-face for that internal communication to be effective. And they want to be told by someone that they trust, whether that be an immediate supervisor, one of their colleagues, a fellow sailor, or in some cases, a family member. And that's where the ombudsman really comes into play, that they are able to take that internal communication, that messaging from upper echelon, and carry it down to the deck plates to have that conversation with family members, who can then have those conversations with our sailors over the kitchen table. So as you can see, ombudsmen and PAOs do have quite a bit in common. Obviously the same goals, but very different perspectives and different roles. And that's why alignment is so key between a PAO and their ombudsman. When you think of alignment, they need to be seeing things at the same viewpoint. And that's why orientation was so important to our study, is that finally we had data from the ombudsman and from the PAO on how they saw different aspects, different points of consensus, like John mentioned, and a few points of dissensus as well. So that moving forward, the PAO and the ombudsman from different commands can hopefully work together to speak from a singular voice and get that messaging down to our sailors. Alignment is also key in teamwork. As Lauren mentioned, the ombudsman has a very unique role in that by instruction they're allowed to take feedback from families and go directly to our COs, our XOs, and deliver that feedback directly to them. As a PAO going to a large command, it would behoove me to establish a relationship with that ombudsman so that before they go to my boss with this feedback, hopefully they're going to me as well, because inevitably I'll be hearing it from my XO in about 15 minutes. So what are some, well then that was one thing that was a little bit frustrating with our survey, as Travis mentioned we had a low response rate. a lot of our PAOs were coming back to me and they're like, Rob, I can't fill out this survey. Unfortunately, I don't have a relationship built with my ombudsman. I was like, well, you're not helping us out with our study, and also you're missing out on a key asset that can help you with internal communication. So, what are some practical takeaways? Obviously, our study was through a military lens. There are ombudsmen out in certain civilian organizations as well as federal entities. But even if your organization doesn't have an ombudsman, there are still some key tenets that you can take away. Obviously, get to know the different assets on your team, whether they be an ombudsman or other personnel who can help you with that internal communication. You need to know their strengths, their competencies, and teach them about your role and your competencies. And once you have that relationship built, you can work together on cohesive messaging to get after some of those problems that are affecting your families and your sailors moving forward. So as I mentioned, Admiral Zumwalt, back in the 70s, he took over. Retention rate was at 10% for first-term sailors to re-enlist in the Navy. That rate gradually rose year after year until 1974 when he turned over as CNO. When he retired in 74, the retention rate was at 33% for first-term sailors. Obviously, I can't attribute all of that to the ombudsman, but I certainly don't think that better communication with our families and our sailors would have hurt that number at all. So as Travis mentioned, we did have a few hurdles to overcome with our research. For future researchers, they want to delve into this topic some more. Would recommend you kind of grease the skids with higher echelon offices. You'll increase your sample size, and you can get more generalizable data, more people taking your survey, and kind of expound upon some of the trends that we saw in our research. Thank you.
All right, that's the end of our presentation. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you all for being here. We'll take your questions now if you have any for our crew.